Part 44. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 437. Dead. Sudbai's fingers couldn't help but rub it, and a relatively wide refrigerator with rows of corpses in it immediately appeared in his mind. If it is a dead person, it cannot speak, noisy, or make trouble, does not need to eat, or drink water. In addition, the Wang puppet government's nature of kneeling down on the Japanese at that time and the absolute status of the Japanese in the Japanese occupied areas, hidden living in a research institute like this is really not a big problem. But using dead people as living subjects? This idea is really novel. Sudbai was also greatly influenced by later reports about 731. In addition, Sudbai remembered that he had watched a movie about 731 when he was a child. The most nerve-wracking scene in it was the experiments on bacteria are done on living people, so I have some preconceptions without realizing it. This is also related to the mainstream trend of thought that is popular nowadays. There is a condition for human beings to tap their own potential, and that is while they are still alive, instead of waiting to be used to research and develop a monster after they die, which is a bit similar to the ancient emperors who cultivated immortality and refined elixirs. What they wanted was not to attain some bliss after death, but to prolong their lives and enjoy more time on the throne. Yes, dead man. Ning Cheng put on his clothes. I was already dead at the time. I clearly remember that a Japanese soldier knocked me to the ground and covered me to death with something. They didn't want bodies with damaged bodies, such as those who had been shot or hacked to death with sharp weapons. Dead. Cover it to death, the fat man said, a little puzzled. The efficiency is a bit low. Yes, if the Japanese wanted undamaged corpses, they couldn't let groups of beast-like Japanese soldiers take a piece of cotton cloth and go to the streets to cover the dead without guns. Buried alive. These two words came out of Sudbai's mouth. The fat man was shocked. Yes, buried alive. Ning Cheng smiled slightly, but when he smiled, his teeth were biting his lips. It was obvious that he was not really smiling. The fat man suddenly felt a little difficult to breathe. Sudbai saw this and thought that the fat man at this time was really an angry young man. If it weren't for the constraints of radio on the audience, the fat man would probably buy a plane ticket and fly to Tokyo to pay tribute to the imperial family. A feng shui killing array is arranged in the house. After thinking about this, Sudbai suddenly thought of a question: audience, does it exist in Western Europe, China, and other countries? Will there be one in Japan too? After all, the fat man thought that dozens of members of his great-grandfather's family might have been buried alive and then the bodies were sent to that research institute for experiments. He felt like a big stone had been blocked in his heart, which made him very uncomfortable. Chinese people have always been particular about individuality. The deceased is buried in peace, and the deceased is honored. The fat man comes from a Taoist family. His grandfather and father are both Taoist priests who work in Sichuan. Naturally, they attach more importance to this aspect. This must also affect the fat man. Thinking that his ancestors were treated like guinea pigs and their bodies were destroyed, it made Fatty wonder if he was in a good mood. Fortunately, Fatty's mood was rarely fluctuating, but Sudbai next to him was able to maintain his composure. What about you? Are you a product that has been successfully tested? How many products like yours are there? Sudbai's words can be regarded as asking the key point. If Ning Cheng was dead at the time, why was he able to be resurrected later? It must be the Japanese research that has produced results, but how could the Japanese let their research results escape from their hands? When I woke up, I found myself lying on a pile of corpses. Ning Cheng rolled up his sleeves and touched his arm. There were many dense needle holes here, and there were also many needle holes on my back. Kong, the corpses next to me are similar. They should be judged by the Japanese as waste products of failed experiments. There were several incinerators next to the pile of corpses. The Japanese should have a special place to store intact corpses that had not been experimented on. The place where I was when I woke up was probably used by the Japanese to incinerate used corpses. Perhaps, at that time, the Japanese decided that I was also a failure in the experiment, so they sent me there to be incinerated. As a result, I woke up at that time. If I had woken up earlier, in the Japanese laboratory during the Japanese observation period, I probably would have never seen the light of day. Even if Japan were defeated and surrendered later, according to the international environment at the time, I might either be secretly transported back to the Japanese island to continue secret research, or, I might be given to the Americans as a gift by the Japanese, and the Americans would take over. Anyway, I will probably spend the next 100 years of my life in a laboratory, forced to do research that will never stop every day and every night. What a good luck, Subai sighed. In fact, considering Ning Cheng's bloodline and the corpse spots on his body, Subai was basically convinced that what Ning Cheng told him should be true. As for how much the other party concealed and did not say, Subai I don't know, because Subai, who has blood and zombie blood, has the most say when it comes to vampire blood and corpse spots. He had been a little strange before. When he met Ning Cheng for the first time, he was partly because of Ning Cheng. Cheng has a bloodline that is purer than his own, a genuine listener, and on the other hand, it is because Ning Cheng has a ray of death wrapped around him. The vampires, to ordinary people, are just a group of cold vampires who like to sleep in coffins, but the vampires are also a kind of living beings. Although they have always belonged to the dark camp in Western legends, they are fundamentally different from the undead, and Ning Cheng, the death aura on his body, gave Subai the look and feel of a zombie. Subai didn't believe that this guy, who wasn't even an audience member, actually had the blood of vampires and zombies like him. So, when Ning Cheng's explanation came out, it all made sense. Having stumbled upon Lin Zhou before, even the fat man became wary, let alone Subai, the person involved, so he naturally put 12 times more effort into exploring Ning Cheng. Then how did you escape? One person killed all the Japanese soldiers in the entire research institute and then rushed out of Nanjing City. The fat man also calmed down his emotions at this time. He picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Compared with the blood that Subai and Ning Cheng liked to drink, the fat man suddenly felt that this cup of tea brewed with a tea bag and boiled water was particularly delicious. Delicious. Haha, Ning Cheng shook his head. If I had such great abilities, would I still be caught by you? The fat man heard this and nodded. These guys are indeed not very powerful. They are both vampires, but there is a huge gap between them and the mentally ill Bimax sitting next to him. I was very hungry at the time, very hungry, and then. When Ning Cheng said this, he pursed his lips, as if recalling a scene that he didn't want to look back on. He was also the one who personally cut off the wrist wounds of living people to draw blood. It is he who is frightened now. Human beings are such complex creatures. You drank the blood of the corpse next to you. Subai said at this time, because Subai had experienced the desire for blood when he suffered serious injuries. At that time, blood was not only food for him, but also a magic medicine that saved and extended his life. And Ning Cheng at that time, the reason why he woke up in the pile of dead people was because the vampire bloodline was successfully implanted in his body. Therefore, at that time, the nature of the vampire would make him desperately search for the source of blood that could be found around him. Yes, I drank the blood of the corpses around me. They had been dead for a long time, and their blood had long solidified. Moreover, their bodies still exuded a strong corpse smell. Ning Cheng admitted it. Then, I took advantage of the Japanese shift change and hid in a truck of cinders that had just been pulled out. I escaped from that place in that way. The cinders just pulled out of the incinerator are also at a terrifying temperature. Although it is not enough to make a roasted whole lamb, it should be more than enough to roast a sweet potato. So I climbed out of the cinder truck and found Ning Cheng, which was ascended to heaven. At that time, there should be no trace of skin left on the whole body, and the whole person was almost burned to a bloody pulp. Although he had blood, this kind of injury could heal on its own, but the pain he endured was real. The fat man suddenly interjected at this time, under the Purple Mountain is the secret research institute of the Japanese, right? What's going on with that research institute now? After the war, before the Japanese surrendered, they closed and hid the research institute. Because the research institute was deep underground, and because Mr. Sun was buried in Purple Mountain, it was endowed with great political significance. Even if it was to break ground, it would be renovations and basic construction of tourist facilities will be carried out on the surface without going too deep. I later got in touch with the military commander. After they ended the political review of me, they allowed me to be re-enrolled into the new army on the grounds that I was a straggler. Later, when the Civil War began, I also went to Taiwan. After that, I could no longer see people with my true face, because I would not grow old, so I resigned and left the army, and then just lived my life like this. You didn't go back to Purple Mountain to have a look, the fat man asked. I have seen it. I went to see it after the Japanese surrender. Later, when Chiang Kai-shek was defeated and retreated to Taiwan, and cross-strait relations were tense, I took the risk of changing my identity and entering the mainland to visit Nanjing a few times. After that, I didn't go to see it again. Then, I can't figure out what your motive is. You said you were just eating and waiting to die. Why did you suddenly jump out when you heard the news about the Purple Mountain project? The fat man shrugged and asked, even if I am worried that the poisonous gas leakage will endanger the innocent hearts of the Holy Mother, but there is no reason. Once the construction team digs into the underground research institute, the government will definitely be alerted, and then the biochemical and epidemic prevention troops will come directly. In this day and age, whatever viruses were left in the research institute in Japan should be there now. With sufficient technical means and conditions to control it, it is basically unlikely that any epidemic will break out. Hearing what the fat man said, Ning Cheng's face suddenly twisted. He slammed his hands on the glass coffee table. The coffee table shattered and the glass pierced his hands. He almost roared. After the end of the anti-Japanese war, I could have reported to the national government, which was still the capital of Nanjing at that time. Even after the civil war fails, I can still report it to the central government of the mainland. But I do not have. Because no matter which government, I don't want it to take over that research base, the research facilities and research results sealed by the Japanese, at the expense of my family's life, and the lives of so many Chinese people, one by one, fill it out. No matter which government, after learning about that base, do you think it will destroy it and wipe it out? No. They are all the same. It will be like they found a treasure and they will continue to conduct secret research. Why should I hand over this dirty and bloody research result of the lives of my parents, my wife, and my whole family to the country? Why? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 438. Subai could understand Ning Cheng's hysteria. A vampire who lived for nearly 100 years, fought with Japan and the Civil War, and later moved to Taiwan and the United States. What hasn't he seen? What has never happened to him? No matter how stupid a person is, after living for so long and witnessing so many major events, his thoughts and thinking patterns have already transcended the limitations of many people's thinking. If what Ning Cheng said is true, when the major powers were locked in the quagmire of World War II, they actually cooperated sincerely and researched together in that institute, then it is no wonder that Ning Cheng was so obsessed with the so-called regime. Distrust of doctrine. In fact, this is something that everyone can imagine. For Ning Cheng, that research institute was a nightmare for his family. It even carried the sorrow of countless Chinese people. It was like a poppy flower. It is beautiful in appearance, but the fruits it bears are even more terrifying. No regime will be willing to give it up, even if it violates human ethics, even if the research results are truly anti-human. Just like elementary school students, everyone knows the horror of nuclear bombs and the threat to the Earth and mankind, but aren't the 5 major countries dedicated to researching intercontinental missiles to maximize the deterrence and strike capabilities of nuclear bombs? As far as the country is concerned, there is no right or wrong in the eyes of ordinary people. For Ning Cheng, the fruit of that flower was watered by the lives of his family and the blood of countless people. He hated that fruit, hated it completely, or it had been buried deep under the Purple Mountain. He didn't care, since he only had half a year left to live anyway, but this fruit was about to be dug out, reused and studied, which was equivalent to tearing Ning Cheng's back scale. Talking to Ning Cheng about putting collective interests first, talking about national interests first, talking about the overall situation, talking about selfless dedication, talking about believing, trusting, and listening are completely useless to Ning Cheng. Moreover, this world no one could see it more clearly and thoroughly than him, because he was a witness or even a participant of that era. Then if you tell us this, you would rather the 2 of us pick the fruit than give it to the government, the fat man asked. Ning Cheng also sat down at this time and pulled out the glass pieces stuck in his palm one by one. The dense wounds on his palm also began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye, but his face became he was a bit paler. If nothing else happened, the thief tied behind Chiang Kai-shek's portrait would definitely have to be bled out by Ning Cheng later. It's not like I haven't encountered people like you before when I was in the West. Ning Cheng said this. It was clear that he had been exposed to Western audiences. This is normal. When Ning Cheng is walking on the road and is discovered by a more powerful audience, he is like a beautiful girl taking off her clothes under a big lantern in the dark. The attraction is amazing, even for Subai. He was attracted the first time he saw Ning Cheng, and the idea of how to use the other person's blood immediately came to his mind. What's more, there should be more listeners for vampire enhancement in the Western Circle. Ning Cheng wandered around in the West and was not attracted there. It was good luck to capture the audience. Of course, perhaps it is also because Ning Cheng himself has always hidden himself. After all, he will not age, so it is difficult for him to have a fixed identity. In addition, the audience class is a pyramid structure, and it can be seen at a glance the actual audience in Ning Cheng, even if it is not a senior audience, should be about the same. There are not many listeners of this level in the East and the West, and it is not like the cannon fodder class of low-level listeners. The number is relatively large, so it also reduces Ning Cheng's reputation. Probability of discovery. You people live in society, but I can't grasp the slightest trace of your existence. I don't know who you are or why you appear, but I know that you are not affiliated with any organization. You are one by one. I would rather fall into your hands than a single body. Damn, you are so enlightened. Fatty still has a lot of radios at home. Do you want to go back with me tonight to see the little goldfish and listen to the radio? The fat man actually started teasing him at this time. In fact, Fatty also had a deep meaning. Subai said that Ning Cheng also admitted that he only had half a year left to live, which meant that he would die soon. Is there any way to extend his life? Yes, of course, be a listener. I have never heard of any listener worrying about dying of old age. Subai's breath suddenly trembled when he heard Fatty's seemingly joking and probing words. Fatty noticed it immediately. At the same time, after Subai reminded him, Fatty also knew that he had said the wrong thing. Who can be a listener and who cannot be a listener can be decided by you as a listener. If listeners could consciously mass-produce it, wouldn't others have used it? Yes, generally speaking, if you change the fate of an ordinary person, or change his life or death, there is a high chance that he will be accepted by the radio as a listener. This is actually a balancing act of radio. The impact of real-world activities is reduced to a minimum. Subai had only heard that it was usually someone who became the audience unconsciously, such as Chu Zhao, such as sooner. If Subai hadn't taken action at the beginning, Chu Zhao and the female ghost would have continued to be together, and they would have become infected soon. Suner became seriously ill and died, perhaps because she had too much involvement in the matter at that time, so she was also included as a listener on the radio. Subai has never heard of an audience that can make an ordinary person become an audience with a purpose. Broadcasters are not stupid and cannot give you the opportunity to display such small thoughts and calculations. Otherwise, there will probably be many. The whole family, young and old, is the audience. If you hadn't met us, could you tell me what your original plan was? Subai asked seriously. Ning Cheng clenched his hands together, then suddenly let go, his lips slightly opened. He originally. It's to put there. It exploded. After leaving Ning Cheng's home, Subai and Fatty walked out of the community. Fatty walked to the trunk, opened the trunk, then reached in, and easily and casually lifted the man in jeans who had been unconscious in the trunk. Broken neck. Subai threw a rag to the fat man. Wipe it, don't spill blood on my car. The fat man smiled, wiped it seriously, then threw the rag in and got into the passenger seat. The cowboy man was already looking down on human life and had killed several ordinary people. If the fat man killed him, he would not cause karma, but would accumulate virtue. Naturally, there would be no pressure at all. Moreover, with the emergence of Ning Cheng, the real master, the cowboy man's basic, it has no value. You can't let it go. It's easiest to kill it. Subai was about to start the car. The fat man took out a cigarette and said, "Do you think he really planned to blow up the research institute before? Even if he is a vampire, he is not that capable. In China, gun control is very strict, let alone explosives. Don't underestimate the ability of a man who has lived for 100 years. Do you really think that he has spent these 100 years lying in a coffin lid hibernating?" The fat man listened thoughtfully. Yes, a person who has truly lived for 100 years and remains youthful. He has experienced the anti-Japanese War, the Civil War and many major events later. He can do whatever he wants and run the business at will. He can also build his own power, and Ning Cheng doesn't the kind of person who likes to be quiet and do nothing. Fatty has seen it with his own eyes. Although the decoration of the house in that old community looks very tacky now, it is definitely expensive. The military uniform was fake, but some of the furnishings inside and even the edging of the small steps were all genuine gold and silver. Roughly speaking, the decoration of that room would have cost at least $5 million. And this was just a pre-arranged residence for only a few days before Ning Cheng decided to return home in a hurry. From Fatty's point of view, Ning Cheng's level of tycoon is probably on par with Dabai before he became a money-splitting boy. A person like this knows that he won't live long anyway. In the end, even if he takes out all his business, opens up relationships, clears the environment, and sets off a big firecracker under the Purple Mountain, it is really not that difficult. Then, he's not afraid that if he blows up the underground research institute so casually, some poisonous gas virus will leak out. Subai smiled and looked at the fat man. Fat man, honestly speaking, do you still regard yourself as an ordinary person now? The fat man was silent for a while and shook his head. A guy whose whole family died tragically and survived for 100 years without any heirs, who still has to drink human blood from time to time, and who also knows that he won't live much longer, is it possible for a guy like this to still regard himself as an ordinary human being? Deep in his heart, he had no thoughts that would hurt innocent people. Ning Cheng is a paranoid, even a bit similar to Subai in some aspects. What does the life and death of others have to do with me? Then do we really want to go to Purple Mountain as promised to him? Although Nanjing is quite close to Shanghai, I still feel a little unsure. After all, with Lin Zhou's experience, what if it turns out to be a humming trap again? Of course, Subai knew what Fatty was thinking. Fatty looked really not that timid and unbearable. What he had shown before was actually just a way to pave the way for him not to go to Purple Mountain. Because the fat man knows that there may or may not be something in that research institute. Who knows if the Japanese cleaned up and packed away everything that could be packed when they closed it. To take a step back, even if there is something, it is something related to the blood clan. Sudbai is a blood clan and can benefit from it. What good does he, a Taoist priest, have? In addition, Fatty had already gone to Kinhuangdao with Sudbai last time, and Sudbai had already owed him a favor. Before the last favor was fulfilled, Fatty really didn't intend to continue to mess with Sudbai. Brothers should also settle accounts clearly, let alone the audience. From Fatty's point of view, he can't always be the one doing the hard work and helping Sudbai, right? He is not Sudbai's younger brother. However, before Sudbai could speak, he suddenly slammed on the brakes and the car that had just started stopped suddenly. Sudbai grabbed the steering wheel with both hands, a look of pain on his face, and the fat man next to him suddenly grabbed the clothes on his chest, and his breathing began to become difficult. Listener friends. Realistic tasks are now released. Brother GE. The fat man cursed, he wanted to cry. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 439. Nanjing is not far from Shanghai, and it only takes less than 2 hours by high-speed rail. What surprised Fatty was that there were no special buses in Ningcheng, but chose to take public transportation. A person like this was originally prepared for there was a guy lighting firecrackers for fun under the mausoleum of Mr. Zhongshan in Purple Mountain. Fatty really couldn't see through him. Even though Fatty was known to be a good person, he was considered a social butterfly in the audience circle. Perhaps, only the rich can truly understand the minds of the rich. After thinking about this, Fatty couldn't help but look at Sudbai sitting next to him. The fat man's family knows his own affairs, and the communication in the audience circle is a very pure communication. It depends on strength, weapons, and interests. It is primitive and pure without any dust, just like the market in the slave society. Where did it come from? There are many twists and turns, and if the clear exchange cannot be accomplished, then we will find a way to sneak things over again. Before he became an audience, Fatty was actually a small supermarket owner. He usually worked part-time as a Taoist priest in the countryside. Although he lived a pleasant life, he had nothing to do with the upper-class society. Therefore, maybe there are some emotions that belong to the rich, which a loser like me cannot understand. Finding that the fat man was looking at him, Sudbai closed the newspaper in his hand. Is something wrong? The fat man shook his head, lowered the seat, and lay down. After only 2 minutes of silence, the fat man said, Dabai, tell me, if the bastard Japanese really left something inside, we, no matter how powerful we are, can't stand up to a real epidemic prevention and biochemical force. If it's because of us, something is really leaked inside. If it comes out, spreads, and kills people, we will all be responsible for the consequences. This is a realistic task, Sudbai reminded. The broadcast allows us to properly solve the hidden dangers in the research institute. If you deduce the questions from the answers, it has been shown that there should be something in that research institute, and it may cause great harm. Spread and impact, otherwise the broadcaster would not have given us this task. Moreover, if there is only a possibility of simple bacterial leakage, according to the character of broadcasting, it is too lazy to take care of it. Bacterial leakage may have caused a great impact in ancient times, in the Republic of China, and when the People's Republic of China was first founded, but Nanjing is not in mountainous areas. Here in the capital of Jiangsu province, if a suspected bacterial leakage is discovered, national forces can rush here as quickly as possible to deal with the aftermath, and it is basically impossible to have such a large impact and coverage. If it were just something that the secular government could solve and deal with, the radio would not go so far as to issue us with this practical task. Therefore, the things in that institute may only be easily solved by the listeners. Taking a step back, our task is to solve that problem. As for the bacterial leakage you are worried about, the broadcaster must have calculated it well. Even if a human life is caused by then, the cause and effect will not be blamed on us. Our task is to block the aorta, and if the remaining tributaries burst their banks and wash away houses and drown people, for us, it can be regarded as a meritorious service on the radio. In fact, there was one sentence that Subai didn't say. How could broadcasting really regard human life as human life? Thinking back to when Leachy wiped out an entire city by himself, wouldn't Leachy still survive? Moreover, if radio really wants to create a beautiful world with extreme peace and stability, how can there be war in this world? Wouldn't it be a one-and-done thing if the whole world could enter into a unified world and enter into a communist society? In fact, Subai had a somewhat clear understanding of the nature of broadcasting. That is, people can die. No matter how many people die in the war, it's no problem. You can die if you like. It doesn't matter how many people die. But if you are killed by a ghost or a dark creature, the radio will immediately send out listeners to solve the problem. The real world, if divided according to the story world of the radio, should belong to the medium-level technological plane, or even a little further down the line, if there are power attributes that should not appear in this world and cause ripples and damage, the broadcast must rely on the power of the audience to resolve them. The fat man yawned, a little bored. He really didn't want to take this trip, and he was too lazy to escort Subai anymore. If this guy wants to die, he can die. If he gets sick, he can get sick. What the monk said is true. Wrong, being with this guy will really shorten your lifespan, but the real-life broadcasting task has been given, and I have no place to hide, so the fat man feels like a harem in his heart now, and his sorrow is so strong that he is almost dripping with water. But it's okay. The fat man turned around and looked at the two people sitting behind him. He felt a little more comfortable. The reason why the broadcaster issued a mission to him was probably because he happened to bump into Subai. Ning Cheng had already told him about it. The whole story was told to him. During the selection process, he and Subai were chosen. The two monks sitting in the back, Fatty and Subai, were dragged into this gang by force. The broadcast did not release real-life tasks for the monks and Gyatso, but listeners who received the real-life tasks could form their own teams and invite people to participate. In this way, although the favorability and rewards obtained would definitely be diluted, the risks would also be reduced. Fortunately, all four of them now live in Laofang's house, so two of them received the real-life task, and the others were really embarrassed to say that they just stood by and watched. Isn't this how the camaraderie of the audience is established? Gyatso followed the Romans when he came to the countryside, wearing a black down jacket and casual pants. The monk was much more free. It was still the cassock, but it was changed to a less conspicuous color. When Gyatso wore it, it was too eye-catching. During the train security check, he probably had to be paid more attention to by the security guards and police, and other people around him would look at Gyatso through colored glasses. Fatty is also aware of this. He has lived in Chengdu all year round. Sichuan is close to Tibetan areas. The locals are almost used to this kind of monks that can be seen everywhere on the streets. However, tourists from other places still have an instinctive reaction when they see them. Fear. After reading the newspaper for a while or taking a nap, the train arrived at Nanjing Station. He slowly got off the train following the flow of people. Ning Cheng, who got off first, stood very obediently in the aisle waiting for Subai and others. He is very aware of current affairs, or he is not absolutely motivated by interests. In addition, his life is not long, and he is too lazy to calculate and fight for anything. He was left with the last and only obsession, but he seemed very free and easy. Even after getting off the train and leaving the station, there was still no special car to pick them up. The fat man took 2 taxis and sent the 5 of them to Purple Mountain. Ning Cheng said that he wanted to pay homage to Mr. Zhongshan first, and the monk and Gyatso also agreed. The former did so because he had a quarrelsome relationship with that party, so it was appropriate to revisit his old place and pay homage. The monk and Gyatso agreed. Gyatso just thought that he would be writhing under a human mausoleum later, so going to pay homage first would be considered as paying homage first and then fighting. It's not that the monk and Gyatso have much psychological resistance to this kind of thing. This is not tomb robbery. Everyone plans to go to the Underground Research Institute. In fact, they can't reach Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum at all. This Purple Mountain is not big, but small. After all, it's not too small. Secondly, it's not like Fatty and Subai don't know what kind of temper these 2 monks, Gyatso and monk, are. These 2 monks usually look sanctimonious, but they don't even frown when they actually kill people, set fire to graves, and dig graves. One time. It's just that after all, Mr. Zhongshan has been worshipped for almost a year, and he himself has some connections with China's luck. Buddhists are most particular about this, so the monk and Gyatso decided to go say hello, although the times are different now. Even Mao probably doesn't have much luck left for the country, but the centipede is dead but not stiff. This kind of great man has been worshipped for a long time, and he is really almost like an ancient god. Even if it is a nail crack, there is some energy leaking down, and Subai and the 4 of them really don't know if they can bear it. We arrived at Zhejian Mountain at noon. After visiting the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum, it was already approaching dusk. The 5 of us found a place to have dinner. At night, Ning Cheng led us to the location. According to Ning Cheng, we dug down. We will definitely be able to dig into the Underground Research Institute below, and the area around here is actually surrounded by a circle of construction sites. Apparently, the renovation project of Zhejian Mountain has actually begun, which is beyond Sudbai's expectations. Monk, I will use the Liuding Lyogia formation later and ask the gods to help us dig a hole. You can help me to strengthen the formation. According to the location and depth mentioned by this guy, I estimate that we will be able to dig out that hole until midnight. Institute. Amitba, your Taoist Liuding Lyogia formation invited many paper figures to come down. It made too much noise. It was surrounded by a construction site. I don't know how many construction workers were sleeping in temporary dormitories nearby. Are you trying to wake them all up? Okay, Fatty, I'm too lazy to put in the effort. Monk, come here. I know that your Buddhist sect also has the ability to invite Vajra Dharma protectors. You come here and I'll look out for you. Fatty will assign you a special task. The formation of isolation, you dig hard, dig hard. The fat man and the monk actually had a low-pitched quarrel at this time. Subai and Gyatso, who were standing aside, looked at each other and said nothing. They were good at close combat and did not understand formations. So I can't help much at this time. This Underground Research Institute should be quite deep. When the Japanese retreated, the entrance and exit were sealed and hidden, so they could only rely on this method to dig a hole, and they could only borrow the array. Now that the Dharma is functioning, we can't just let Subai and Gyatso dig directly with big shovels. Although both of them have strong physical strength, the efficiency is too low. Ning Cheng, who had been on the phone all the time, suddenly came over and stood next to Subai. He asked with some confusion, "What are your 2 friends arguing about?" "We are debating which method to use to dig the hole," Subai replied. Dig a hole? Ning Cheng couldn't understand. At this moment, the surrounding construction site suddenly became full of people, and the engines of excavators and earth-moving trucks also started to sound. Groups of workers walked out of the dormitories, and the entire construction site suddenly came to life at night. The fat man was immediately dumbfounded. What are you doing? You actually start working in the middle of the night. I originally thought about taking advantage of the quietness of the construction site in the middle of the night and no one to notice, to secretly dig down and enter the underground research institute to solve the problem, but now it's a fool's errand. Let them dig it, it should be done soon, Ning Cheng said calmly. When I heard that the Nanjing municipal government was planning to launch this development project, I had already started preparations and the bidding was successful. Well, this construction site belongs to me. The construction company and the foreman are all my trusted subordinates. You can go have a glass of wine with me now. They will notify us when they dig to the surface of the institute. After Ning Cheng said these words, he turned around and walked to a wooden house opposite. It seemed that he really planned to have a taste of wine. The fat man clapped his hands, narrowed his eyes, and said softly to the people around him, "This guy, why do I feel something is wrong? It is so carefully arranged, is it really just to light firecrackers and hear them go off?" Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 440. Amitabha, this is a realistic task, he should have no other thoughts. The monk came over at this time, with a look of enlightenment on his face. Subai doesn't know how many years radio has existed, but it should be much longer than WeChat. That's for sure. But the history of radio stations is actually very long. Maybe the previous listeners were not. There are other ways to contact the broadcaster through WeChat. Over the years, the radio has been wantonly toying with the listeners under its control, making the listeners struggle to survive for the so-called storytelling of the broadcast. Naturally, the listeners have also been studying the radio constantly. Human adaptability and learning ability are in the process. This aspect is vividly reflected. The monk paused and explained, he knows our existence, knows our abilities, and even participated in the story world with us. In any case, this is impossible in normal times. The broadcast did not erase his memory, did not let him leave through various accidents, but tacitly allowed him to continue doing what he originally wanted to do here. There must be a reason. However, fortunately, we can confirm one thing, Ning Cheng is not the audience. The poor monk thought that maybe it wasn't because the radio didn't want him as a listener. After all, Ning Cheng's bloodline, and even the existence of Ning Cheng, was a kind of destruction to the harmony of the real world. It was an unbearable dissatisfaction for the radio. A stable factor, but he can continue to live as an ordinary person, and be with the four of us listeners. Broadcasting monitors all listeners, and the incident with the blood corpse fully demonstrated this. Therefore, it is impossible for Ning Cheng to escape the broadcast's gaze. He is not a blood corpse, and he is not even a blood corpse. The qualifications are compared with those of the bloody corpses in Shaanxi. Therefore, there is only one reason left, and it is also the reason that the poor monk thinks is the most suitable. This Ning Cheng really wanted to wait for the end of his life and die quietly. For him, this 100 years of life may be more than a kind of torture, and he had never been in Taiwan before. Still, in Europe and the United States, they should be very low-key, so the bottom line of broadcasting has not been touched. Otherwise, broadcasting will casually send a realistic task to European listeners, and solve a Ning Cheng easily. In this matter, Ning Cheng may really have no selfish motives. It may be difficult for us to understand or even agree with him, but he, who is originally quiet and waiting to die, is probably just stimulated by this development project. Then he walked back to the front of the curtain and prepared to tear off his own reverse scales with his own hands. And his mentality of being unwilling to let the government and the things that may exist in the institute come into contact with the secular world without relying on the hands of the government is actually in line with the requirement for harmony and stability in the real world that broadcasting has always maintained. Consistent. All kinds of coincidences and all kinds of tightrope walking may be the real reason why he is still standing in front of us now, because the radio may also know that by forcing him to become a listener and let him enter the world of stories, he may really not be willing to do anything for himself. Struggling for life, not even resisting, willing to die, willing to end his life. Having said this, the monk's eyes swept over Sudbai, Fatty, and Gyatso one by one. The storytelling that broadcasting pursues can only be accomplished by people like us who don't want to die, are unwilling to die, and want to live at all costs. He, Ning Cheng, does not meet the requirements of broadcasting, and does not violate the broadcasting regulations. Rule. So, he can know us, he can stand with us, and he can still be here. From this point of view, he should have no selfish motives, and we really don't need to guard against him. We should focus our attention on the Underground Research Institute as much as possible. If it is not a more difficult thing, the broadcast will not directly you two veteran listeners post real-life tasks. Yes, monk, the bald donkey is very powerful and can speak well. Are you using all your thoughts on serving the Buddha to plan the broadcast? The fat man patted the monk on the shoulder. There was no irony in his words, but a bit of sincere admiration. This monk probably really put all his thoughts on worshipping the Buddha before on the ceremony broadcast. He reasoned back and forth, and with the help of based on the nature and rules of broadcasting, Ning Cheng's true mentality is deduced, which is really admirable. Then let's go and have a rest. Make sure he's not another Lin Zhou with his own thoughts. We can also relax a little. Sudbai calmly walked towards the wooden dormitory where Ning Cheng entered. Has Dabai already thought of it? Fatty muttered. The pervert who understands the most is often another. Gyatso said this and smiled without saying a word. Do you mind if you buy a bottle of wine for 35 yuan from a supermarket outside? When Sudbai came in, Ning Cheng was pouring wine, using a very delicate cup with diamonds inlaid at the bottom. Drinking this kind of wine from such a cup was really a waste of resources. Drink, it won't kill you anyway. Sudbai took a glass and took a sip. It was a sweet and sour grape-flavored liquid, but Sudbai knew that most of the juice drinks on the market now may contain even one there is not even a tiny bit of squeezed juice, so you can directly blend it with chemical reagents to create this flavor. The cost is really pitifully low. About an hour, that's about it. Ning Cheng looked at the time and said, where are your friends? Don't they come in for a drink? They are watching from outside. Sudbai leaned against the wall of the wooden house, face to face with Ning Cheng. It is better to be on the safe side. It would be bad if any poisonous gas leaks during the construction. With them watching, this hidden danger can be eliminated. You are really a good person and kind-hearted, Ning Cheng said noncommittally, tapping his fingers lightly on the wine glass. There should be something you want under that. After hearing this, Sudbai did not respond, but put the wine glass next to him. I am very curious about how the Japanese obtained real vampire blood samples. I got it from the British royal family, Ning Cheng replied. I have also done some investigations over the years. At first, due to the participation of many countries and the fact that Japan made a deal with the United States after the war, the national courts did not investigate these matters. Bacteriological warfare is being investigated, so it is actually very easy to find the parties involved in the original bacteriological warfare research, and at the worst, you can also find their descendants. Ning Cheng rubbed his fingers on a jade ring. It can be imagined that he must have spent a lot of thought and effort investigating that matter over the years. The Second World War and the following 20 to 30 years were a time of great changes. With Ning Cheng's original identity and relationship, coupled with his immortal physique, it was actually not too difficult to create an underground consortium kingdom of his own. But Sudbai's thoughts were not here. Many countries were studying the development experiments of vampire blood on the human body. The purpose was self-evident. On the one hand, they wanted to have powerful soldiers who could recover from injuries similar to vampires. On the other hand, Immortality is an irresistible temptation for high-level people in both Eastern and Western cultural circles. However, this kind of blatant violation of the established rules of broadcasting was actually operated as a state. In other words, at that time, the terror broadcast had not been launched yet. Perhaps, this is the only reason that can explain this incident back then. But now, in a situation where broadcasting is strictly guarded against death and has a group of listeners who can be called gods as thugs, even if the 5 major countries want to, it is also impossible to cross the line and do some research and development in that area. How much of the blood sample do you think is left? This is the issue Sudbai is most concerned about. According to Sudbai's idea, what black scientists in Japan and several other countries were doing at that time was similar to the Hydra organization in Captain America, and film and television literary works reflected exactly the social thoughts of an era. In ancient China, the first emperor sent Su Fu eastward to search for the elixir of immortality. The civilized and martial Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty was also knocked into a coma by a few charlatans and magicians using market tricks. The contemporary movies about super warriors and literary works emerge in endlessly, which reflect human beings' dissatisfaction with their own conditions and desire to break free. Compared with airplanes, cannons, nuclear bombs, and space stations, human beings have actually been relying on external forces, and the stronger the external forces, human beings are more eager to improve themselves. In that underground research institute, scientists from various countries should have had blood samples, diluted and processed them, and conducted experiments on well-preserved corpses with all kinds of wantonness. However, according to what Ning Cheng said before, it was used for there are estimated to be tens of thousands of corpses used in the experiment. How many blood samples can be left? Is it enough to take advantage of it yourself? This is the issue that Sudbai is most worried about. A meaningful smile appeared at the corner of Ning Cheng's mouth. This smile was naturally caught in Sudbai's eyes. Suddenly, an idea appeared in Sudbai's mind. His figure disappeared directly on the spot and strangled Ning Cheng's neck. Pressed it against the wall. What they took were not blood samples for research at all, right? This is Sudbai's question. Ning Cheng nodded frankly. Sudbai's face immediately darkened. At this time, he finally figured out why the radio had to send listeners to solve this matter, and the 2 senior listeners were sent. Because it is very likely that the so-called blood samples are not stored in this underground research institute. It's not a blood sample. Where did the blood used for experiments come from? In addition, Ning Cheng was choked by Sudbai, and his speech was not smooth, but he did not show the slightest fear. This research institute was sealed and closed in 44 years. 44 years? 1944? The Japanese did not surrender until 1945. Therefore, the reason why this research institute was closed was not because Japan had to suspend the research after its surrender and therefore it was hidden and closed. But there is other reasons. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 441. The room fell into silence. Sudbai took a deep breath. The air at the foot of the mountain was filled with chills in the middle of the night, but Sudbai felt a burning sensation in his chest. Ning Cheng was put down by Sudbai. He gently rubbed his neck with one hand and looked at Sudbai in surprise. "Aren't you afraid?" He. A smile appeared at the corner of Sudbai's mouth. Afraid? Why is he afraid? No matter how many blood samples there are, no matter how precious they are. Where to compare to a high-level vampire who might still be alive? Even a jar of high-level vampire blood is not as good as a dying high-level vampire, or even his complete corpse. The gap between the two is the chasm. Moreover, Sudbai had nothing to be afraid of. This time, Fatty, Gyatso and Monk were there to help him hold off the battle. No matter how much the Fatty felt in his heart, since he was here, since he had accepted the task, when the time comes, If he really encounters something that is difficult for Subai, it's a great opportunity. Fatty can't just stand aside and watch the fire, and he can't keep his face down. He will definitely help. After sorting out his clothes, Subai stood at the door. In front of him was the construction site that was under construction. With these professional construction teams, the efficiency must be much higher than Fatty's 6-ding Lyogia formation. It is estimated that if there is another half in an hour, it's almost enough to dig it out. Moreover, with a circle of construction sites as cover, Subai and others can more easily avoid disturbing the underground research institute, and do not have to worry about being discovered or disturbed in the cave outside. In fact, this method is also used by some professional tomb robbers. They often circle a piece of land in the name of real estate development, and then the construction sites around it are in full swing to hide from others. In the middle, tomb robbing activities begin, similar to novels. The Golden Captain in the movie has long been eliminated in today's era. Can I ask you a question? Ning Cheng walked to Subai's side. Just ask. Do you think the blood all over your body is disgusting? As Ning Cheng spoke, his fingers gently scratched the back of his hand, with a look of disgust in his eyes. Subai shook his head. I enjoy it very much. It seems we are really not the same person. Subai understood Ning Cheng's feelings. The origin of his bloodline was the scar that Ning Cheng least wanted to remember, and it was the most painful chapter in his life. Therefore, he hated his bloodline and hated the way he had become like this. Of everything. Perhaps, he was really tired, so he was eager for relief, so the radio did not intend to let him enter the story world as a listener. A guy who even had the instinct of survival annihilated, and only looked forward to death, entered the radio. What kind of story can it have? What's the point? There was a kind of silence between the two people. Indeed, compared to the relationship between two people, silence and quietness seem to be the best way to get along. Even if both people are vampires, there is absolutely no trace of them. In the East, vampires are extremely rare. The fellows in the area felt like they were in tears when they saw the fellows. A little earlier than expected, a black guy wearing work clothes walked over and nodded to Ning Cheng. Boss, we've found it? Ning Cheng was slightly surprised. His eyes glanced at the electronic clock hanging on the wall. So fast. The black man glanced at Subai and explained, those 3 people reduced our construction plan. Now, we only dug a simple cave that can only allow 2 people to pass. Ning Cheng nodded, I understand. After saying that, Ning Cheng walked out of the room, and Subai walked beside him. Is it okay to just open such a small opening? Ning Cheng asked. After all, he is not an audience, so he does not understand the audience. That's enough for us to go in, Subai replied. What was your previous plan? The black man had an obvious smell of blood. Obviously, there were lives on his hands, and there were many people in this construction site who did not look like pure workers. It seemed like a small gathering place for mercenaries. It is conceivable that what Ning Cheng said before about blowing up the place below may not be just casual talk, but the sealed sets of chemical protective suits placed in the room have already explained something. Ning Cheng originally planned to take this mercenary team to the research institute. And the explosion with a bang at the end should be a follow-up action. Did he just want to go back to the research institute to take another look, or was there something he needed to confirm or couldn't let go of? Subai didn't know, but one thing Subai knew was that bringing such a mercenary team with different skin colors to Nanjing, to the capital of Jiangsu province, the price Ning Cheng had paid before and the price it would continue to pay in the future. The cost will be unimaginable. After all, Nanjing has its special political status. In the eyes of most Chinese people, it is a bit like a capital city. The Republic will never allow mercenaries suddenly recruited by a private force to appear here and prepare to cause trouble. Here maybe no one knows about it yet, but it can't be kept secret for long. What will follow will be the thundering anger of the Republic. The source of the anger is not because this research institute was not handed over to the country, but because this hired team soldiers, its appearance touched the reverse scale of the Republic. Ning Chen naturally knows that the underground consortium he runs will definitely be wiped out in the subsequent wrath of the Republic, but he himself does not care. Rather than saying that he only has less than half a year left to live, in fact, tonight Research Institute after the trip, he probably considered himself a dead person. The fat man, Gyatso, and the monk stood beside a deep well that was similar to a steel ring. The surrounding excavation machinery and workers had all withdrawn, and only about 9 people were still standing in place. Fatty and the others can naturally tell who they are. Originally, according to Ning Cheng's plan, he planned to dig a wider cave passage. After all, he planned to lead a small team down and would also bring the necessary equipment. However, they were stopped by Fatty and the others. For the audience, it is enough to have a gap that allows people to pass through and let you go down. Execute the retreat plan. Ning Cheng looked at the mercenaries around him and gave the order. Although he was a little unsure, he still chose to believe in his own judgment. With the 4 people in front of him, he had a small team of mercenaries. There is no need to continue to act. There was no need to do anything, it was just a trip, and the money was still taken. These mercenaries simply turned around and left here, preparing to pack up and implement the retreat plan. The fat man looked at Ning Cheng. He knew that this guy was going to follow him, so he didn't say anything. Although Ning Cheng was not an audience member, he was still a low-level audience member and not a burden. Moreover, this research institute was only a low-level audience member. Only he has been here. Subai was the first to go down. He grabbed the wall with one hand and slid down directly. There were steel bars on the wall to make a layer of supports. As for whether it was stable and whether he would be buried alive underneath, Subai was really not too worried. There must be an above-ground exit in Little Japan's Research Institute, but Ning Cheng didn't know where it was, so he could only dig down at a location he knew about. Once he got down there, it would be much easier to find the ground exit. Even if he was Little Japan is sealed, and the worst-case scenario is that it will be blasted out. They have already gone into the deep sea, so this place is really not a dangerous place for Subai and the others. After sliding down for less than 20 meters, Subai landed on the bottom. Under his feet was a cement wall. The Japanese naturally did not have the luxury to make the outer walls of the base made of steel like in future Star Wars movies. Subai gathered some strength, punched out, and punched through the cement wall under his feet. He crushed a few more pieces with his hands, clearing a passage for the fat man to enter and exit comfortably, and then Subai jumped down. This incident, at least from the current point of view, should be of the greatest possible benefit to Subai, and the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso are considered friendly actors. They can help you come together, and they are already considered the most benevolent among the audience. It was obvious that Subai had to shoulder the task of exploring the road. Inside the cement wall is an environment similar to a subway passage. The space is not very large. It looks like it should be a transportation passage. There is a no fireworks sign on the wall. Of course, it is not written in Chinese characters, but many Japanese words are similar to. There are great similarities between Chinese characters, and Subai can understand the meaning at a glance. Plop. The fat man came down second. He simply sat down and slid into the opening of the cement wall. It was probably because Subai was leading the way, so he was not so cautious. If there was really any danger down there, the fat man wouldn't. I don't believe that Subai will be killed quietly. New pants. The fat man smashed his mouth with some reluctance. It was pitch black all around, but after the fat man came down, he spread his palms and 2 groups of things like will-o'-the-wisps floated for illumination. The monk also came down. Next is Ning Cheng. The last one is Gyatso. This is also for safety reasons. Ning Cheng cannot be allowed to come down last. Although the monk has already deduced that Ning Cheng should have no other thoughts, the four of them are all veterans who have survived a narrow escape. Be careful with this. There are still precautions. Go that way. Sudbai pointed in the direction. He was the first to come down, so he spent the longest time observing. The direction behind should be the exit. Going there, the road slopes upward, and you should be able to reach the exit on the ground. In the other direction, then it should be time to delve into the core area of the institute. The air quality is a bit poor, but there's nothing wrong with it, Fatty confirmed by observing his two flames. The five people began to walk in the deeper direction together. In front of them, there was a corner, and in the distance they could see doors and glass windows that resembled rooms. It was either a dormitory or a laboratory. When the five people just walked around the corner, lamp suddenly lighted up. It came on suddenly, without any warning. In front, a few Japanese soldiers wearing military uniforms and white coats walked over. At the back, a group of Japanese patrolmen came over carrying 38-meter-sized gear on their shoulders. Even around, there were constant conversations in Japanese. Below here. How is it possible that there are still Japanese people alive? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 442. Is it a mirror image? Sudbai was the first to walk, and stopped at this time. However, Sudbai did not panic. Firstly, Sudbai had experienced much weirder scenes than this in the story world. Secondly, this time he was not alone. There were two monks behind him, the monk and the fat man, specializing in the art of ghosts and gods. Although Gyatso majored in Arhat body training, he was also a Tantra monk after all. He said he could only hack and kill, but he who would believe in the true magic skills of Tantric Buddhism? With these three people following him, Sudbai really felt a lot more relaxed. The monk's eyes were slightly focused, and a ray of golden light flashed from between his brows. The fat man held the green leaves in both hands, swept his eyebrows, then opened his eyes, and reviewed the scene in front of him using the eye-opening method. In popular terms, these two people are now opening their eyes. The monk and the fat man had already taken action, so Gyatso didn't add any more fuss. In fact, he had been focusing part of his attention on Ning Cheng. After Ning Cheng came down, he became very gloomy. It seemed that he was revisiting his old place. The memories of those scenes resurfaced, and naturally I wasn't in a good mood. It's not a pure illusion, the monk said at this time, and then he glanced at the fat man and saw the fat man nodded slightly, obviously agreeing with his opinion. What should we do? Sudbai has always lacked means to deal with this situation. He has the zombie aura and the phantom of the cross to strangle the ghosts, but this is actually the simplest and crudest method. With the methods of the fat man and the monk, they must be capable. Maximize benefits. Amitabha, poor monk, please lead the way. This place is much more complicated than what the poor monk originally expected. The monk clasped his hands together and recited the Buddha's name, and his whole body showed a faint green light. At this time, the two Japanese soldiers standing opposite who were talking seemed to have seen the monk. They came over and greeted the monk in Japanese. The monk also opened his mouth and said something, but only his lips were moving. But there was no sound at all. The bald donkey is the best at talking to people, not to talking about ghosts, the fat man muttered next to him. This is actually natural. In Buddhist legends, Ksatagarbha Bodhisattva guards the Abi hell and makes a great wish that the hell will never be empty and he will never become a Buddha. This kind of myths and legends is the same as studying the ideological reports of a certain leader in the contemporary era. For laymen, just by looking at the excitement, experts can often figure out many other meanings, such as the policy outline hidden in it or the planning actions based on it. And this Buddhist mythology story can be seen, Buddhism, he also has his own unique methods of dealing with beings like ghosts. After a while, the two Japanese walked away. The monk put his hand behind his back and waved, beckoning the people behind him to follow them. The monk walked in front, and everyone followed behind. Then, the monk directly hit the wall in front, but his whole body penetrated through. The fat man followed behind and hit the wall without hesitation, and then disappeared completely. Subai and others followed closely behind, walking forward together. After crashing into the wall, everything in sight was gray. Subai was walking behind and could only see the monk's glowing cyan back. Everyone just followed the monk forward, otherwise they might really get lost. After walking for about 10 minutes, the surroundings suddenly became clear. Although there were no lights, there were 2 floating will-o'-the-wisps illuminated by Fatty, and the visibility was good. After crashing into the wall before, the light of the will-o'-the-wisps could not escape at all. However, looking around, Subai found that the surrounding environment was exactly the same as the environment where everyone was before. After walking for such a long time, everyone seemed to be walking in circles, but they finally came out. The monk clasped his hands together and recited the Buddha's name. The blue light on his body disappeared and he looked very tired. There were beads of sweat on his forehead and his breathing became much heavier. The fat man took out a pill from his pocket and handed it to the monk. The monk was not polite and swallowed it immediately. "Did a ghost hit the wall just now?" Subai asked. Those Japanese people were definitely not living people. They should be similar to the kind of phantoms that appear when lightning occurs or the illusions created by ghosts staying in place. Subai knew this, but looking at the way the monk was panting now, Subai suddenly felt that the matter was actually much more serious than he had expected before. Otherwise, if it is just a simple phantom or some ghosts of ghosts staying in place, whether it is a fat man or a monk, they can easily take care of them. Call. The fat man also breathed a sigh of relief. "Mudun, if we hadn't looked carefully, the 5 of us would have rested here together." Obviously, the fat man is really scared, and this is not a joke. It is definitely not an ordinary thing to make the fat man who always likes to pretend to be a pig and eat a tiger really afraid. Amitabha the monk recited the Buddha's name, it shouldn't be, this is Jinling, this is Nanjing, not to mention the fate of accompanying the capital, let alone Mr. Zhongshan directly above, it is impossible for this place to change, this is the situation. Subai still didn't understand, and there was nothing he could do about it because he didn't speak professionally. Gyatso pursed his lips and asked, "Chi Lv, is this the pattern of ghosts replacing ghosts?" "Ghosts replace ghosts," is a saying in Tantric Buddhism. Differences in location factors and cultural environment factors have led to the development of Buddhism in different regions. The Buddhism that flowed into the Central Plains has become a woman who looks gentle and courteous, at least on the surface. In the eyes of inland people, monks are kind-hearted. The image of a kind-hearted person, while Tibetan Buddhism has embarked on another development route. Now, if tourists go to some temples that have not been fully commercially developed, they can still see the remaining ritual tools made of human bones. Therefore, Tantric practice pays more attention to results and takes an extreme route. The method of controlling ghosts is regarded as evil magic and evil method in Central Plains Buddhism. However, in Tantric Buddhism, no monk with a little bit of Taoism can't do it. Controlling ghosts, as the name suggests, means people are controlling ghosts to act, while ghosts are controlling ghosts to act. These are 2 different concepts. People are the spirit of all things, and those who practice Taoism and Buddhism have their lives. The level is naturally higher than that of ordinary people. Controlling ghosts can be regarded as a natural law for higher creatures to control lower creatures. Think about it in the opposite direction, if a ghost can control another ghost, then how strong is this ghost? How terrible! The Ghost King is nothing more than that. But this poor monk was still wondering before. Even if this underground research institute is a place where ghosts and monsters appear by chance, why do we only see images of Japanese researchers and Japanese soldiers? Hearing this, Subai finally understood. What the monk meant was that Japanese soldiers should have died here, otherwise the Japanese would not have hastily closed this research institute before they surrendered in 1944. They must have there was an accident, but if a ghost situation really happened here and ghosts really appeared, why did we only see Japanese ghosts? According to Ning Cheng, this research institute is like an assembly line. The corpses transported in for experiments and then burned in the incinerator are estimated to be tens of thousands. Even if ghosts appear, it should be the Chinese undead appearing here. That's right, how many Japanese can there be here? Monk, do you mean that the Chinese undead here are controlling the Japanese undead? Subai asked. If the number of ghosts here is not just these Japanese, but reaches tens of thousands, for Subai and others, it is no exaggeration to say that the threat factor of this size is directly transformed from a slingshot into a nuclear weapon. If the ghosts were broken through the wall with violence just now, the 5 people present may have been swallowed up by thousands of ghosts. Died. The monk was hesitant. He didn't know whether he should nod, because something felt wrong. Impossible, Fatty interrupted at this time. It can't be like this, absolutely impossible. There must have been many Chinese people who were killed by the Japanese invaders here, but among them were ordinary Chinese people, some were defeated troops, and some were victims who had come to Nanjing to take refuge from other places. Although they were all Chinese, they were of different races, different families, different surnames. Even if they want to form a ghost pit, it is impossible to have such a harmonious side. Since ancient times, wherever ghost villages, ghost palaces, and ghost caves appear, it is because the people who died in this area were of the same race, a village, or a specific group, such as an army. In this way, they died together. If they turn into ghosts by chance, they can form a whole. But here, it's simply not possible. As the fat man spoke, he squatted down, took out a compass with his left hand, and pinched it with his right hand. But judging from the hexagram, there is a 1 here. What Fatty said is very simple and clear. There is a will controlling everything here. If this will were not the compatriots who died in the first place. So, who else? Unconsciously, Subai suddenly found that the eyes of the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso were all looking at him. What's wrong? Subai asked. The fat man smiled hee and said, pretend, you keep pretending. Damn, I thought that no matter how much you gain this time, you will just take a bowl of blood and water back, and if you want to take back a foot bath of blood, I'm going to be jealous now. What are you doing? Surviving a catastrophe will bring you blessings. Last time in the story world, you came back alive and kicking when the inevitable situation was revealed. This time you are doing a real-life mission here, and you can still encounter such a good thing. No, the baby's heart is not balanced. You are full, but we can't let our 3 brothers work here for free for you. Ba the monk was obviously echoing the fat man's words. Ahem, Gyatso also coughed. Ning Cheng, who was standing among the 4 people, suddenly felt a little strange. The atmosphere had changed a bit quickly. How could the atmosphere that was so solemn before, as if encountering great danger and hidden dangers, transformed into the atmosphere of a stock exchange at this time? Subai couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. Obviously, Fatty and the others have guessed that there is a living vampire here. They are not stupid, they are even smarter than most of the audience. Now they ask Subai in a clear way. Do you still want our help? Well, if you want to help, you have to show your attitude, either give me some magic weapons, or owe me a favor, your choice. Subai knew that although this was a real task and all 4 of them had accepted the task must be completed, but this did not allow Subai to feel at ease and let Fatty Monk and the others help him get everything done. The core of the mission is to get rid of the vampire here. Killing it or subduing it and letting Subai absorb and devour it would still complete the task, but it was obvious that the former was much easier than the latter. Am I the kind of person who doesn't repay favors? Subai asked back, and at the same time he also expressed an attitude, which means you help me today. Next time, monk, if you want to go to a dangerous place to find relics, I will go with you. Fatty, if you want to go to a certain place next time, I will go with you. I'll go with you to find the ancient alchemist's tomb in this place. Gyatso, if you go to Tibet to do something next time, I'll go with you too. I owe this favor. Subai's attitude undoubtedly satisfied the monk and the fat man. At this time, the fat man came over shamelessly and patted Subai's shoulder angrily. Damn it, Dabai, what do you mean by saying this? We are friends. Isn't it natural for friends to help friends? What about being unkind? If you talk about fat man again, I will be angry. It means you don't take it? We are true friends. Of course, Fatty's words should never be taken seriously. If Subai had really foolishly regarded the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso as his true friends, Subai would have been trapped in a small corner where no one cared about him. Maybe the grass on the grave is already 3 feet tall. The friendship between the audience is so pure. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 443. This is what they should look like. After clarifying the matter of favors and debts, the people who had survived the ghost wall began to really go deeper. Before going far, the fat man discovered the corpses of 2 Japanese soldiers. The 2 corpses now looked like mummies. Their clothes were still on, but they no longer looked human. Dabai, come and see if it is the handiwork of your relative. The fat man waved to Subai, indicating that Subai should come over and take a look. Don't look at it, it was made by a high-level vampire. Ordinary vampires cannot suck all the blood in a person's body so cleanly. Subai had already noticed this. There was no trace of blood on the 2 mummies. It would be difficult for a normal dead corpse to draw blood so completely, no matter how much blood was drawn. This method should make all the blood in this person's body evaporate by itself, without leaving any trace behind. Just like ordinary people teach their children not to have leftovers when eating, vampires also have this obsessive-compulsive disorder when it comes to sucking the blood of living people. They even say that this is a kind of etiquette belonging to the vampire clan, sucking the blood of living people in front of you. The cleaner you get, the more respected you are and the more respect you have for the food you rely on for survival, blood. To be honest, Subai hasn't reached this level of this blood-sucking technique yet. After fusing his natal weapon, Subai gained the ability to collect essence from the corpses of freshly dead corpses, but that method can't be so domineering and thorough. And Subai has always felt that it is better to bite someone's neck with his fangs and drink blood, because this can make him feel the other person's temperature, struggle, fear, and despair. That guy came back to life, the monk frowned, but since it came back to life, why didn't it escape? This is a big question. The Japanese, British, and other scientists from other countries shipped that thing here and started to study it. The guy should have been in a state of suspended death before, but for some unknown reason, it came back to life. And looking at this domineering way of sucking human blood is enough to show that its power had already begun to emerge at that time. But why is it still here and not leaving? This is actually very easy to confirm. The level of ghosts that everyone encountered when they first came in could not have been formed without an absolute core of will to control it. This is what is still left in this research institute. Irrefutable evidence. It is impossible for the monk to believe that it could not come out because the Japanese closed the research institute at that time. There must be other reasons that have been hindering that thing. Is it possible that Mr. Zhongshan suppressed it? Fatty guessed from the side, but then he shook his head and looked at Subai. Dabai, was Sun Yat-sen's mausoleum demolished after Little Japan occupied Nanjing? Obviously, the history of fat people is indeed not very good. Subai shook his head. The Japanese did not touch the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum because of the need to win over people's hearts. Even when the Japanese attacked Nanjing, the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum only suffered some damage, but was not completely annihilated. So, the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum has always been here. Fatty guessed. Is it possible that there is really something called luck in the dark that makes Mr. Sun Yat-sen suppress this beast here and prevent it from coming out? The theory of luck is inherently mysterious. Sometimes it works very well, sometimes it doesn't work very well. For example, if Mr. Zhongshan really had that terrible ability, then Little Japan would not be able to break into Nanjing. But if you say that Sun Yat-sen mausoleum is of no use, it is not necessarily true. At the very least, ordinary people can feel the solemn and upright pressure when approaching Sun Yat-sen mausoleum. The audience of Subai and others whose life levels are far higher than ordinary people are even more sensitive than ordinary people in terms of qi. After coming here, they can also feel a kind of pressure sitting on them, as if there is something. A pair of eyes was staring at them. Subai believes that this feeling can also be found at the Zhou Enlai Memorial Hall in Huayan. These modern great men have left their own strong ink in the modern history of China. After their death, they also bear the incense in disguise. Naturally, it is not that simple. However, this kind of energy can suppress the lonely ghosts around. Is it possible to suppress such a powerful guy? Subai immediately rejected it in his heart. If it is really useful, then when entering the story world, one audience will be carrying a sculpture of Zhou Weiren on his back, another one will be carrying a sculpture of Mr. Zhongshan, and another one will be holding a pile of red treasures. If the book sings a red song, what kind of magic weapon do you need? At this time, Gyatso directly added the attack. It shouldn't be the cause of Mr. Sun Yat-sen. The Sun Yat-sen mausoleum certainly embodies Mr. Sun Yat-sen's awe-inspiring righteousness, and it also has the national destiny of Nanjing as the capital. It should be no problem to suppress demons and monsters, but suppressing vampires? Sun Yat-sen mausoleum is not a cathedral, but there are no crosses, and vampires are not ghosts or undead creatures. Moreover, if Sun Yat-sen mausoleum can really suppress the vampires, Dabai will probably be lying on the ground unable to move. To say the least, it is because Dabai is strong and can ignore this kind of suppression. What about this one? Gyatso pointed at Ning Cheng. A weak vampire doesn't feel any discomfort here, so that thing has stayed here. It probably has little to do with the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum above the head. At least, it has no direct relationship. There must be other reason, so it can't move. Okay, anyway, that ghost is in this research institute. We have to meet it face to face. The fat man smiled. Monk, you are tired too. Next, I will lead the way. God knows if there is only one ghost here. To break the wall, if Fatty has a mass grave of dead souls beside me that I can borrow, Fatty will definitely have to arrange thousands of them to be satisfied. Amitba, I really hope that person is not as boring as you. If that thing really has the same bad taste as the fat man, then everyone should stop playing and just keep breaking ghosts and walls in there for a year and a half. It is better to go up first and use Ning Cheng directly. The method is to blow it up. If it doesn't kill it, it can also blow up the situation below. If it comes out, then all four of us can do it together. The fat man first opened his eyes again and motioned for everyone to follow him. Fortunately, that person was really not as boring as the fat man, and he didn't encounter any troublesome people along the way. Ahead, a huge iron gate appeared. On the right side of the iron gate was a dead end, and on the left was a passage. There were actually several tracks on the ground of the passage. These two iron gates were really huge, occupying a large area. Ordinary factory doors are much larger. The fat man walked in front. He reached out and touched some things on the iron door. Here, there were buttons and control devices. The fat man couldn't help but sigh. How many popsicles can be stored in such a big refrigerator? Refrigerator, the monk heard this and took a few steps closer. He seemed to have thought of something and immediately changed his color. Sudbai's face also darkened. Apparently, he also thought about what this was. Ning Cheng's whole body trembled. This cold vampire actually shed tears at this moment. In fact, Sudbai had guessed that the reason why he insisted on coming here was because of this place. It's for what this fat man calls a refrigerator. The monk and Sudbai were silent, with ugly expressions on their faces. Gyatso was a little calm, and Ning Cheng was in tears because they realized what was behind the big iron gate. And the fat man obviously realized it. His hands were trembling, no, his whole body was trembling, and his fat body was trembling too. This is not a show, this is not a mystique, and this is not a joke. Because the fat man is afraid, he is really afraid. Damn it, why didn't I think of what was going on here before? Why did I have to be such a mean-spirited person for no apparent reason? Snapped. The fat man slapped himself hard, and the corner of his mouth was immediately broken, and blood flowed out, leaving a black and blue mark on his left face. Obviously, the fat man's slap was a real slap, not just a show. Plop. The fat man knelt down. Kneel down facing the iron gate. Zhang Bei, who was good at pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger, good at stabbing people in the back, and good at all kinds of dirty tricks and cruel methods, was so frightened that he knelt down at this moment. Huang Tian, the unworthy citizen Zhang Bei is here to repent. A wooden sword flew out of the fat man's sleeve and inserted directly into his left arm, causing blood to flow out. The three pure ones are on top. Zhang Bei, the unscrupulous heir, is here to repent. The wooden sword flew up again and pierced the flesh and blood of the fat man's right arm. My ancestors are on high, and the unworthy descendant Zhang Bei is here to repent. The wooden sword spun around and pierced the fat man's lower abdomen. Although these three swords were not fatal to Fatty, or even caused much damage to Fatty in a real sense, the pain was real. But then, something happened that made Sudbai, the monk, and Gyatso all take a breath. The fat man actually slapped his heavenly spirit cap, and a wisp of green smoke rose up from the top of his head. Then it disappeared, and the fat man's whole aura suddenly withered. Zhang Bei will cut off 3 inches of his soul here to make up for his disrespectful words. After leaving, Zhang Bei will conduct a 7-day dojo for you, pray for you and eliminate disasters, and induce the reincarnation of those who cannot be sent to hell. After saying that, the fat man kowtowed 3 times to the iron gate solemnly, making a loud sound. What was inside this iron door became clear when we discovered that it was a huge freezer. When the Japanese set up a research institute here, they used Chinese corpses, and these compatriots were killed by the Japanese. Those who were massacred and killed after entering Nanjing City. This is national mourning, this is shame. Even if 6 decades have passed, it will still be the most bloody scar in the heart of every Chinese. Fatty's nature is to like to talk nonsense. He actually hadn't thought about what was behind the iron door before. By the time he did, the joke had already been made. At this time, he naturally had to apologize. In the audience, there are no innocent people, murderers, evil people, everyone has done all the unscrupulous things in the story world, and everyone's buttocks are dirty, but there are some things that really cannot be joked about. This is the bottom line. However, Sudbai was a little surprised that the fat man knelt down and confessed his mistake. Sudbai felt that it was almost done. The fat man apologized with 3 swords and 6 holes. Sudbai also thought that the fat man died in Nanjing because he accidentally insulted his family. However, the fat man actually cut off 3 inches of his soul vein, which was equivalent to destroying 30% of his strength. In Sudbai's opinion, this was really too much. After facing the iron gate, Sudbai felt heavy and sad, and the monk felt the same way, but there was absolutely no need for the fat man to do this, and there was no need to be so cruel to himself. To put it bluntly, with Fatty's current cultivation level, even if the icy soul behind the iron gate came to seek revenge on Fatty, would Fatty really be afraid? What is strength? It is the lifeblood of the listener, it is the listener who will do anything for it, and it is the fruit of the listener's near-death struggle. The fat man just did this and simply sacrificed 30% of his strength just to make amends, just to apologize for a joke. Sudbai narrowed his eyes. The fat man was actually so patriotic, but it felt a bit weird. At this time, Sudbai looked at the monk standing beside him and found that the monk was opening his mouth without making a sound, and said two words with his mouth shape. Sudbai understood these two words. Cause and effect. Sudbai finally figured it out. The fat man who had always advised him not to blindly study cause and effect in order to avoid death had actually begun to study cause and effect a long time ago. Moreover, his level of understanding may really be no worse than his own, or even more advanced than his own. What the fat man is really afraid of is that he is afraid that this joke will contaminate him with tens of thousands of karma, because the corpses of his compatriots transported from behind this iron gate are estimated to be tens of thousands. Their souls are entrenched here, and their spirits in heaven are also watching here. Coupled with the fact that the environment at that time was a national war, these victims represented the tears and sorrow of a country at that time, the blood and shame shed by a country at that time, which involved the fate of the country. If you offend them with your joke, they will turn into ghosts one by one and come to you. You are not afraid of them. Each one can kill one by one. However, once the destiny of the country is involved, once the luck is involved, confrontation and revenge do not exist between ghosts. At the level of revenge of a Taoist priest, the fat man is afraid, the fat man is panicked, so he does not hesitate to harm himself and destroy his strength to pray for forgiveness. On the contrary, if the fat man does not understand the cause and effect, he does not need to be afraid at all. Cause and effect is a circle, and you obediently do not step into the circle. At that time, nothing happened to you, but when you stepped in, those things that had nothing to do with you suddenly could kill you. Suddenly, the scene of Lan Lin going crazy in front of him, becoming hysterical in fear and finally committing suicide appeared in Sudbai's mind. That such a powerful woman, an outstanding woman who could surpass Yan Huiyang and Piao Lu, in the end, facing the cause and effect that I have understood, so unbearable. This scene is so similar to the fat man kneeling in front of the iron gate and still bleeding. Sudbai suddenly found that there was a throbbing deep in his heart. This is fear. Sudbai lowered his head in fear and couldn't help but gasp for air. Turn out to be. Do you also feel afraid? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 444. The fat man stood up tremblingly, breathed a long sigh of relief, and looked as usual, which was indeed in line with the fat man's temperament, thick skin, dark belly. 1 second he calls you brother-in-law and wants to have children and in-laws, and the next second he can twist your head off and use it as a ball to kick. Although Fatty has always been known as the audience social butterfly, that is only among audiences of the same level. In fact, Fatty's reputation has always been bad in the audience circle, and he is unscrupulous in doing things. Of course, this also made Sudbai more awake. Naturally, the monks and gyatso around him were also sober. Perhaps, even the four of them knew in their hearts that the friendship between them was very pure. It simply meant being together when there was benefit, and stabbing each other in the back when there was benefit. But no matter what, after experiencing so many things, and even now we are still living under the same roof, getting along day and night, no matter how cold and selfish a person is, there will always be a little bit of extravagant hope in his heart, he will always be looking forward to it, and there must be a little bit of that luxury called friendship, even if it's just a little bit. After all, humans are social animals, and humans will always be lonely. However, when the fat man suddenly showed in front of the three of them that he was actually comprehending the cause and effect, the three of them suddenly felt shocked. They didn't look like fools, let alone fools. Naturally, they couldn't wait until someone stabbed the dagger into their chests before regretting it. The scene in front of them was enough to wake up the three of them. After Subai told the story of his survival from the last story world, Fatty was the most outspoken person who reminded Subai to stop trying to understand cause and effect, and be careful to kill himself. Before that, in fact, Su and Fatty had talked about cause and effect when they went to Kinhuangdao. Fatty also regarded cause and effect as a terrifying beast, indicating that he had no courage to touch it. But now, what about the liar? Didn't you understand the cause and effect, so why are you so frightened now? You have sworn before to advise us not to meditate on cause and effect for fear of disaster, but you secretly meditate happily without letting us know. Subai had personally experienced the scenes before Lan Lin committed suicide. That woman, relying on cause and effect, plotted against Yan Huiyang, plotted against Piao Lu, and plotted against Subai. In her opinion at that time, the world was just being manipulated. It is determined and constant by cause and effect. Even if Yan Huiyang and Piao Lu are the same audience as her, and there is still a good personal relationship between the three of them, she will do whatever she wants to do, in order to implement what she wants. The cause and effect of seeing. Similarly, Subai was sure that the monk and Gyatso should also know how crazy those so-called people who think they control cause and effect are, not to mention the so-called audience friends around them, and even the parents and children at home. It can also be a trap. For example, they saw that they could not save their son, otherwise they would be involved in many disasters in the future, so they watched helplessly as their son was hit and killed by a speeding car a few meters away from them. In fact, at that time, he didn't even need to use the power of the audience, and he didn't have to worry about making his son an audience. He just needed to reach out like an ordinary father, grab his child who was running around and give instructions. Cross the road carefully and his son will not die. This kind of thing is so ridiculous, so absurd. The fat man turned around. He was definitely not in good spirits now, but he also noticed that the eyes of Subai, monk, and Gyatso had changed. This was also because the three of them had no intention of hiding their feelings. Thinking, because everyone is a human spirit, and Fatty also knows what he just did, it is impossible for these three people not to see what happened to him. Otherwise, if they can't even see this, these three people don't deserve to live under the same roof with them. Subai sighed, stepped forward, and checked the facilities of the freezer first, and found that most of them had been rusted due to disrepair. The large iron door could have been opened with a button, but now it must not be open when you come to the institute. Secondly, even if it can generate electricity, the button may be malfunctioning. Subai grabbed the side of the iron door with both hands, and began to exert force. The iron door began to move slowly, making a harsh squeaking sound. Gyatso also came over, grabbed the iron door on the other side with both hands, and worked hard with Subai. The monk stood beside the fat man and asked, "Do you need a poor monk to help you heal your injuries?" The fat man shook his head, took out a few pills and put them into his mouth to swallow. He knew that this page had been revealed first. Now that everyone has received a real task, they should complete the real task first. As for the future, Fatty also knew in his heart that of course everyone could continue to eat and drink at Lao Fang's house in the future, watch TV, play cards, and drink tea together, but it would be difficult for a few people to do something like this together. At least, it is basically difficult for fat people to participate. The relationship between people is originally a dance on the edge of the profit knife, maintaining a superficial intimacy. Now if you create a cause and effect, God knows when you will go crazy and kill everyone. Moreover, Fatty also understands that this kind of madness and this kind of uncertainty are more intolerable to the audience than Dabai's mental illness. The monk once said that unless necessary, he would try not to get involved in Sudbai's affairs in the future. In fact, Sudbai's style of suddenly flipping the table sometimes made the monk very uncomfortable, but as long as you don't deliberately cheat him, deliberately go if you provoke him and deliberately plot against him, Sudbai will not get sick and say that he will fight to the death with you. At most, he will commit suicide on his own instead of frantically dragging everyone to hell together. The iron door was open to a width of nearly 3 meters at this time, which was enough for everyone to enter. The fat man clapped his hands, and the will-o'-the-wisp split from 2 into 6 and spread in, illuminating the scene inside. Call. Sudbai couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. The scene in front of him could even completely wash away the incident involving the fat man. Row after row after row, on densely packed iron frames, there were corpses lying as far as the eye could see. There were corpses everywhere. They all lay here quietly, and unknowingly, they had been there for more than a century. Each corpse had a number and sequence marked on it. When Sudbai walked into it, it felt like walking into a slaughterhouse, but Sudbai knew clearly that this place was an individual and belonged to his compatriots. Even Gyatso, who has always regarded himself as an outsider, had to clasp his hands and recite Buddhist scriptures at this time. In fact, this kind of scene where human beings are completely treated as expendables, even this tantric monk found it a bit difficult to accept. The fat man bit his lip, almost breaking it. The monk closed his eyes and chanted Buddhist sutras with Gyatso. Ning Cheng was alone, walking deeper and deeper, gradually distanced himself from Sudbai and the others. He was looking for his parents, his wife, and his relatives. At the beginning, the Japanese captured my whole family together and covered them all to death. So, if nothing else happened, my relatives should have also been sent to this underground research institute. It is very likely that their bodies are now just lie here. But it is also possible that because the experiment failed, they were sent to the incinerator by the Japanese and turned into a handful of ashes mixed together. However, Ning Cheng still remembered the number that was engraved on his wrist when he woke up. This number was just like the pigs sold in the market today, which require a purple stamp to prove that they are not sick. The same is true. It can be seen that the Japanese beasts back then really treated the Chinese as human beings. At this time, the seal number on Ning Cheng's wrist had long since disappeared from his skin over the years, but he had always remembered that number in his heart, firmly remembering it. Birds fly back to their hometown, and foxes must head to the hills when they die. I believe that it is not my fault and I abandon it. How can I forget it day and night? Falling leaves returning to their roots is a knot that flows in the blood of the Chinese people. On that day, when the Japanese invaded Nanjing City, Ning Cheng felt that he was dead. He was really dead. He did not feel that he was still alive. He also doesn't think that living like a zombie is called living. This is a true portrayal of Ning Cheng's mentality. Therefore, the radio did not draw him into the story world and did not accept him as an audience. He was a dead person and had no story to speak of. It is much more convenient to have a number. Your parents, your wife, and your family should not be far from your number. Finally, Ning Cheng's eyes rested on a female corpse on the iron frame on the second floor in front. The corpse here had completely taken off its clothes, and due to the passage of time, the corpse had inevitably undergone some changes, but Ning Cheng still glanced at it. He recognized his wife, but his parents and other relatives could not be found. Ping Jun, I'm back. Ning Cheng stretched out his hand, held the female corpse in his arms, and kissed her forehead. Tears were already pouring down the dam. Dad, Mom, I'm back. Ning Cheng's eyes began to shed bright red tears of blood, and the skin on his body began to age at a rate visible to the naked eye. Sudbai, Gyatso, the monk, and the fat man also came over. They looked at Ning Cheng holding the body and crying bitterly from a distance. He was deliberately draining the blood in his body. Suicide. Until, Ning Cheng completely turned into a mummy. Holding the female corpse, his body gradually lost all possible temperature. Subai and others standing in the distance were finally convinced that he was back here. Really, just to come back and see. Real. Just for the fallen leaves to return to their roots. Subai stretched out his hand and looked at his palm. It seemed that he had been immersed in the conflict of interests for too long, so Subai never trusted Ning Cheng. But until the other party died peacefully in front of him. Only then did Subai realize that there really were such pure people. Suddenly, Subai seemed to realize something. Because such a pure person will not even be arbitrarily influenced by the radio. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 445. Amitabha. The monk clasped his hands together. It seemed that Ning Cheng's ending was also a touch for the monk. He comes from the world of mortals and goes to the world of mortals. The monk is not a pedantic monk. In fact, if Sakyamuni knew the dogma and code of conduct he practiced, he would probably jump out of the coffin lid and strangle him to death. However, people are not grass and trees, and how can they be ruthless, especially after getting used to the big dive out of the audience circle? Seeing this ending will inevitably make people feel a sense of sadness. Ning Cheng's life is destined to have ups and downs. He has experienced the anti-Japanese war, the Liberation War, and the two Mr. Chang in Taiwan. Even if he is not a vampire, this life is far more exciting than most people. At the same time, he has also experienced with a bloodline. Although your lifespan may not be infinite, at least you will remain young forever. Although his strength is much inferior to that of monk Subai and others, he is undoubtedly more free than Subai and others. Without the worries of life and death in the story world, without the constraints of broadcasting, he manages his own power in the darkness. If he likes it, if he wants it, he can have a more exciting and magnificent life in the eyes of ordinary people. But his final choice was to return here, to the most unbearable page in his century-old life memory. Perhaps, before he died, he found his wife's body and was able to sleep with her body hugging each other. It was his greatest satisfaction. This is true willfulness. This is true satisfaction. It's just that after all, feeling is feeling and touching, and after all, it's just touching. It's like sitting in front of an open-air movie studio and watching anti-Japanese movies when I was a child. While watching, the villagers were excited, cursing Japanese imperialism, cursing Little Japan, and they couldn't wait to see it. I picked up the hammer and hoe at home and immediately ran to the Japanese island to kill everyone. But after the movie was over, the next morning, the children went to school and the adults went to the fields. Life must go on. Because Subai and the others knew that the broadcast could not control Ning Cheng, but they were not Ning Cheng. Even when Subai was ill, they were not thinking about seeking death. Since you want to live, since you want to survive, then you cannot escape the clutches of radio. It's strange Gyatso was the first to recover from this sad mood, and immediately discovered a problem. Since the refrigeration here has long been broken, why has the temperature here been so low after so many years? It's still so low. Subai's face immediately condensed. Yes, the refrigeration system had long been broken, and the Japanese closed this research institute in 1944. Even if Little Japan really closed the research institute and still foolishly continued to provide power to the research institute, in 1945 Japan surrendered in 2006, and this research institute was obviously deliberately hidden by the Japanese. Subai did not believe that after Japan surrendered, the Japanese would still be able to continue secretly at the foot of the Purple Mountain, where the founding father of Zhongshan power is supplied to the research institute under the mausoleum. There are 7,000 to 8,000 corpses stored here, if not 10,000. Let alone the refrigeration system that has been suspended for 70 years, Even if it is only suspended for a month or even half a month, the corpses here will immediately stink and rot, because these corpses, it's not like the coffins of ancient nobles were made with any imitation measures. The Japanese only regarded these corpses as disposable experimental consumables, so naturally they couldn't spend so much effort. The fat man rubbed his fat face, and a small bag appeared in his hand. The bag contained objects similar to go pieces. This is the magic weapon used by Fatty to set up the formation. Well, it can barely be called a magic weapon. The monk stood behind the fat man. He knew what the fat man was doing, so he didn't say anything at the moment. He sat cross-legged with his cassock hanging horizontally in front of him, chanting Buddhist sutras, and the sound of Buddha's voice rose loudly. This was to help the fat man clear the surroundings. All influences. The fat man cut off 3 inches of his soul vein before, so his vitality must have been severely damaged. It was only right to help him set up this formation at this time. The Lord of Heaven is above, manipulate the Baidu hexagram. The chess pieces were thrown out by the fat man one by one, and they did not bounce when they landed. Instead, they seemed to be stuck to the ground. Subai and Gyatso retreated a distance, leaving plenty of space for the fat man and the monk to set up their formation. About an hour later, the fat man finished setting up the formation. Then he pointed his right index finger and made a motion to draw water. In the formation, a wisp of black smoke immediately rose up. The black smoke was chaotic and lingering, as if it had an innate vitality. Gyatso immediately took a breath of cold air. Subai also immediately shuddered. Although Subai and Gyatso are not good at formations, Subai himself has zombie blood, and Gyatso comes from Tantric Buddhism after all. This wisp of black smoke is corpse energy. Moreover, it is active corpse energy. After a person dies, corpse energy will naturally appear on the corpse. Generally speaking, corpse energy will continue to dissipate as the body decays, and finally returns to dust with the body. However, active corpse energy is something only zombies have. The so-called ghost blowing out the lamp actually has this meaning. Corpse gas is naturally harmful to the human body, but as long as you don't suddenly open a coffin that has been sealed for decades and just stick your head in and take a deep breath like a cigarette, there won't be much danger, nor will the human body. So fragile, now citizens in many big cities in China are breathing in the thick smog every day and go about their normal lives when they should go to school and go to work. But if the corpse G becomes alive, then the problem will be big. First of all, the corpse G becoming alive means that the place where the corpse originated, that is, the corpse will wake up. At the same time, the activated corpse G will no longer look like fog. Haze is like curing by inaction. Instead, it will actively invade the bodies of some living creatures around it, destroy and infect it. At the least, it will cause you bad luck and ruin your luck, and at worst, it will directly make you seriously ill. The active corpse gas will also blow out the lamps and candles. This is also the way of early warning for tomb robbers. For them, as long as the corpse in front of them does not turn into rice dumplings, they can even use the jade in the chrysanthemum of the corpse. They dug it out without any psychological pressure. When the warlord's son Dianying dug up Sixi's tomb, Sixi's vagina was also dug out by those Chuba. With so much active corpse energy, why is there no corpse transformation? The fat man asked a little doubtfully, and then he looked up. The corpse has no hair, and the corpse energy is alive and not chaotic. This should be the result of Mr. Zongshan's blessing. The monk nodded with deep understanding. Amitabha, this should be the case. Mr. Zongshan's mausoleum is buried here. It should have such effects. These people were already very pitiful when they were alive. If they die and turn into zombies, they will not enter reincarnation. It's so pitiful. My Buddha is compassionate and Mr. Zongshan has great merit. Subai's body slowly ossified and shrank at this time, and his eyes also emitted a faint green light. He switched out of the zombie state at this time. At this time, he clearly felt a pressure from the top of his head, bringing breathing in the righteous and peaceful breath comforts oneself, and resolves the anger in one's heart. Subai didn't feel this way before because he didn't turn into a zombie state, but once he switched from zombie state, this feeling suddenly became clear and obvious. Subai also raised his head. Above his head was the location of Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum. When the Japanese invaded Nanjing, the commander-in-chief of Nanjing's defense simply ran away. Unlike the Battle of Songhu, which lasted 3 months, the Japanese did not spend much effort in attacking Nanjing. The ancestral community and the ancestral temples should be protected by future generations. At that time, the unfilial piety of the descendants allowed the Japanese to directly invade the capital. Even the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum was basically restored in the next 7 or 8 years. Under the control of the Japanese and the Wang puppet government, the Japanese Sino-Japanese friendship and the Wang puppet regime's National Salvation banner were planted all over the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum, humiliating Mr. Sun Yat-sen. At that time, I guess no one was too embarrassed to hold him accountable. Why didn't Mr. Zhongshan show his spiritual power to prevent the Japanese from entering Nanjing? Subai knew clearly that if there were so many corpses that died with resentment left in this Japanese research institute without any treatment, they would almost certainly turn into corpses. Even if they were sealed here and could not get out, they would still be dead. As soon as the drought demon emerged, the land was thousands of miles away, and so many zombies appeared here, which was also a devastating blow to the surrounding ecological environment. After we get out, we can pay homage to Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum, the fat man said. This is the result of the utilitarian psychology of the Chinese people. Chinese people like to worship when they enter a temple. No matter what Buddha or what Taoism, it is always right to worship more. If you find that this temple is really useful, then try your best to worship a few more times. Suddenly, Subai's eyes narrowed. No, there is another important reason why these corpses did not turn into zombies. Mr. Zhongshan suppressed most of their corpse energy, but some of them were also extracted. Subai clearly felt that even the corpse energy around him was being pulled out by a force. Following this feeling and direction, Subai walked out of the warehouse and walked forward along the track in front. Imagine that more than 70 years ago, the Japanese pushed the stretcher cart next to them to transport the corpses one by one from here to the laboratory. The fat man, the monk, and Gyatso followed Subai. After walking for about 2 minutes, there were rows of laboratories with glass windows in front of them. There were many electronic instruments and even corpses inside. It was obvious that the Japanese were in a hurry when they closed the institute and had no time to clean it up. Directly in front of the 2 rows of laboratories, there is a steel door similar to a prison, with steel bars standing there, which really looks like a prison. The 4 of them continued to walk forward. After getting closer, the fat man released 2 balls of will-o'-the-wisps, and then they could clearly see the scene inside. A corpse was lying there quietly. There were many things attached to the corpse, including church crosses and onmyoji banners. Furthermore, the limbs and neck of the corpse were all cuffed with steel rings. There were 2 sinister fangs looming at the corners of the corpse's mouth. White down grew on his arms, and his fingers also had long, black nails. But at the same time, he exuded a feminine and noble aura. Breath. This is the vampire that was used as the experimental mother, but he turned into a corpse. This is the rhythm of turning into a zombie, and his white hair has grown out, the fat man exclaimed. Immediately, the eyes of the monk, Gyatso, and the fat man all fell on Subai. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 446. In the past, whenever people encountered zombies or vampires, and Subai was around, whether it was the fat man or the monk, they would always joke. Look, Dabai, your relative. This is just a joke. After all, in this world, vampires and zombies are rare, but for listeners who often experience extremely dangerous environments, the probability of encountering zombies or vampires is really not small. However, this time, a vampire brought here by the British 70 or 80 years ago was actually contaminated with corpse air and almost turned into a big rice dumpling. Vampires and zombies are really not popular in the Eastern and Western listener enhancement lists. However, I have only encountered one listener who has both a vampire and a zombie bloodline, whether it is a fat man, a monk, or gyatso. That is Sudbai. Amitba, this is not a relative, but a relative. Even the monk who always showed a serious and solemn face had to sigh at this time. Originally, when they knew that there would be a vampire down here, the three of them were actually a little jealous in their hearts. However, the three of them, including Sudbai himself, probably did not expect that there was a corpse at the bottom of the research institute. Bloodlines. It's like a beggar walking on the road and picking up a gorgeous piece of clothing, and the size of the clothing is perfect for him. At the same time, after putting it on happily, he discovered that there was a lot of gold in the pocket of the clothing. Sudbai exited from the zombie state and returned to his original appearance. He is in a state of deep suspended animation. Although for a vampire, he is not completely dead, but it is basically impossible to wake up. He is a vegetative state among humans. It is just a vegetative state among humans, even if he does not have specific consciousness. But the body is still in an active state, unlike a vampire. Once a vampire enters this state, it is basically breathless and has no living body reaction. The only thing that can remain is the incorruptibility of the flesh. Therefore, when the British transported him here for research, they probably thought he was completely dead, just like the mummy the British stole from Egypt. Sudbai pointed to the vampire inside and explained to the people around him. Even if he becomes a zombie, can't he wake up? Fatty asked next to him. Zombies are originally a product of Wan Muchun in front of the sick tree. After the corpse is faked, it is equivalent to the beginning of a new life. There is no longer any connection with the original body in life, not even memory. At most, some subconscious instincts are left. Since he has turned into a corpse, then he should be a new life. Moreover, the blood of the Japanese corpses we saw when we came in had been drained. Obviously, what the fat man said is right. The vampire has fallen into a state of suspended animation. Based on Sudbai's understanding of the vampire, it is almost impossible for the person inside to wake up. However, white hair has grown on his body and his fingernails have turned blue. Black, this is the sign of a zombie. It has become a new life and will naturally wake up. I don't know why he continues to lie here unable to move. Sudbai shook his head and looked at the monk. Generally speaking, the monk did have his own unique way of looking at problems. From ancient times, eminent monks could play with the upper-class nobles in the palm of their hands, and at the bottom they could fool hundreds of people at the bottom to pay homage. Can already show the terrifying nature of their thoughts, not to mention that the monk had previously relied on his habit of broadcasting to deduce Ning Cheng's mentality and purpose. The monk hasn't spoken yet. At this time, Gyatso put his hands together and said, "Success is the same, and failure is the same." The monk nodded. There are terrifying groups of corpses in the research institute, and they are all people who died tragically, with great resentment. Therefore, their resentment and corpse energy were captured by the person lying here. Although he followed the instructions Sudbai, you said, has entered a state of suspended animation, but after all, he is not a vegetative person among ordinary people. Even if he lies there motionless, there must be another mystery. He received those resentments and corpse energy, and nourished by these resentments and corpse energy, he turned into a corpse. But there is also corpse energy in success, and there is corpse energy in defeat. Sudbai, even if you switch to the zombie state, you can at most feel a little pressure from Mr. Zhongshan above your head. That is because you are powerful and because your level is no longer suppressed by a mausoleum. Even Zhongshan, the awe-inspiring righteousness carried by your husband and the good fortune of Nanjing, the accompanying capital, will not be able to suppress you. What the monk said is certainly correct. Otherwise, no audience with enhanced darkness would dare to go to temples or tombs of great men. The monk paused and said, "But those corpses are different from you. They were ordinary people before they were alive. After death, they are also ordinary ghosts and ordinary zombies. They are scattered sand one by one, so the ones above their heads are just like ordinary people. Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum can suppress them one by one, and even continue to wear away their resentment as time goes by. Therefore, even if this vampire took in the corpse energy and resentment and transformed into a corpse, almost giving birth to a new life of his own, his corpse energy, his resentment, and everything about him came from the data in that cold storage. Thousands of corpses, those corpses were suppressed by Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum, and their derivatives, this one, were also suppressed together. Subai pursed his lips, and after listening to the monk's words, he finally understood that even though the vampire in front of him was in a state of suspended animation, even if he had turned into a corpse, Subai could still feel the nobility in his bloodline. At this time Subai was like a grassroots seeing a noble. Such an existence, once it turns into a zombie, is probably no less terrifying than the legendary drought demon. It is definitely not an easy task for the four of us to join forces to suppress him when he wakes up. But the root of the opponent's corpse was the corpse in the cold storage. His own root was suppressed, so he naturally couldn't get up, let alone wake up. There is a saying that has been passed down in China since ancient times, that is, the blessing of ancestors. Many people think this is useless, it is feudalism or superstition, because the ancestors did not bless them to enter a prestigious university, or to get promoted and make a fortune, but here, in this institute, if it were not suppressed by the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum on Purple Mountain, it is conceivable that thousands of zombies and vampire zombies would wake up, which would be a disaster for the entire Nanjing, and even for most of Jiangsu and Zhejiang. Even if these zombies and vampire zombies emerge from the ground, the sensed laws of heaven will rain down thunder and annihilate them, but the ecological disaster they will cause will be immeasurable. Then I can't eat him. Subai grabbed the railing with one hand, and with a little force, a section of the railing was broken by him. The current situation was indeed embarrassing. For Subai, it was like having a delicious meal in front of him but not being able to eat it. At this time, Fatty had recovered from the 3 swords and 6 holes at the beginning. He didn't care what the other 3 brothers thought of him, and he returned to his true colors first. Dabai, now Fatty, I feel much more balanced. This guy is lying here, but you can't eat him, ha 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 ha. It's like a beautiful and pretty girl stripping off her clothes and performing a sexy dance with you. Your dick is hard up there, but you find out that you don't have a condom around you, and this woman is still infected with AIDS. Oh 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 oh, 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 oh. The fat man's words are not rough. Now, this vampire zombie, the 7 or 8,000 corpses in the cold storage, and the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum above his head basically form a dynamic balance, or a food chain. If Subai wants to feed the other party, devouring the opponent's power with his blood is equivalent to tying himself into this ecological chain. When the time comes, why is this one lying here motionless now? After Subai devours that one, he will continue to lie here motionless in his place. Of course, there are ways to destroy this balance. For example, let Subai devour the vampire zombie first, and then let others go up and demolish the Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum. Subai will naturally regain his freedom. But if Subai is surrounded by other strengtheners this time, Xiaozai Ili is still very likely to be successful. But now Subai is surrounded by 2 monks, asking them to destroy Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum. They don't know how to do it at all, and there is no room for negotiation at all. Unless they want to renounce their own beliefs, others can dismantle it. If they dismantle it, they will be punished by God. This is what Buddhism and Taoism pay attention to. and if Subai goes up and smashes the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum by himself first, and then looks for this unfettered vampire zombie and the 7 or 8,000 corpses that turned into zombies, then this realistic mission will be considered a failure. The broadcast asks you to eliminate the danger. But you detonated the nuclear bomb. Okay, let's go to the next story world to be judged together. Let's GG together. Even if Subai is selfish enough to go his own way, even if he is sick, the monk Fatty and Gyatso will definitely not allow Subai. Come for nothing. As for getting rid of the 7 or 8,000 corpses first, even if the monk and the fat man sit in the 7 or 49 executions, it will probably be a drop in the bucket, and the broadcast cannot give them so much time. Since the broadcast has announced the real task, naturally it is because the balance here may not be maintained for long. But let's work together to destroy this vampire zombie, the monk suggested. Now, since there is no way to pick peaches, naturally there is only the last step, which is to complete the task honestly. The 4 people take action at the same time, releasing their strongest attack methods to destroy this vampire zombie. This task, even if it is completed, the 7 or 8,000 corpses below will be suppressed by the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum, and there will be no problem. Even if developers develop it, dig up the research institute, alarm the government, and lose the vampire zombies, have nothing to do with them. Those corpses will be properly disposed of, and they will be transported out and buried to receive the grief and condolences of the Chinese people. There will no longer be the possibility of corpses mutating. And this research institute may become a record of Japan in a few years. Museum of Bestial Crimes. Subai gritted his teeth, feeling unwilling. The fat man did not hide his gloating at all, and even lit a cigarette and smoked it happily. Even the monks and Gyatso, the 2 eminent monks, couldn't help but twitch the corners of their mouths slightly. In fact, they were all envious of Subai's opportunities before, and they were even a little jealous. They were not worried about the scarcity but the inequality. Now, everyone is finally more balanced and comfortable. Go destroy him and complete the mission. Subai was also a decisive person. Now that he had decided on something, he stopped dragging his feet. After breaking 4 or 5 railings in succession, Subai walked in, followed by the fat man, Gyatso, and the monk. However, when Subai was just standing in this room, a vicissitudes of life and weak voice suddenly came from this motionless vampire. Ancest, is that you? Subai was stunned for a moment, and then, as if he thought of something, he opened his hands, and a shadowy figure tied to a cross was revealed. Ancestor, it's really you. I sensed your aura, my respected friend. Have you finally come to rescue me? The monk suddenly felt a pain in his chest, which made him, an eminent monk, feel uncomfortable. Gyatso subconsciously gritted his teeth and made a friction sound. The fat man, on the other hand, forgot to spit out the cigarette he had just inhaled. He swallowed it directly, then held his neck and retched. This thought flashed through the minds of all 3 people. Damn it! This is fine. Damn, I met a relative.